An installer stands in your basement with a clipboard, looks around for about 10 minutes, and writes you a number. $30,000, $45,000 if you want the bigger cabinet. He calls it whole home backup, and he says it like that settles it, like the only decision left is whether you can afford it. Meanwhile, the forecast says 3 days of wind and rain, your freezer is full, and somewhere in the back of your head, you're doing the math on how long a full freezer stays safe with no power. That's the trap. Outage fear on one side, a 5-figure number on the other, and nobody in the room asking whether that number is actually right. Then he hands you the quote to sign, and you notice there is no real explanation for why it's that number and not half of it. I spent 35 years wiring homes and installing backup power, generators, solar, batteries, all of it. I got the 2 a.m. calls when the systems people bought, without checking, failed exactly when they needed them. I've also seen homeowners pay for twice the battery they needed because nobody walked them through the math first. So before you sign anything, here are 8 things to check. Some of them will save you thousands of dollars. One of them might talk you out of whole home coverage entirely. And I'll tell you now, that's not me being difficult. That's just where the numbers land for a lot of houses. A few years ago, before the tax credit expired and before the tariffs hit, this math was a lot more forgiving. A battery that penciled out at $10,000 after incentives now runs closer to $15,000. That changes which of these checks actually matter. And it means a quote that looked fair in 2023 might be a bad deal. In 2026, even if the sticker price on the equipment has not moved at all. So let's start with the check every other one depends on. Check number 1. Your real load, not your square footage. Most installers size a battery off your house size or your panel size because it's fast and it lets them quote a bigger system. What actually matters is 2 numbers, your continuous load and your surge load. Continuous is what you need to run for hours. Your fridge, your furnace blower, your well pump if you're on one, your lights, your internet. Surge is the jolt those things pull for a second or two when they start up, because a well pump or a central air conditioner compressor can pull 2 to 3 times its running wattage the instant it kicks on. Here's what that looks like in real numbers. A typical fridge, furnace blower, well pump, and lighting circuit might add up to somewhere around 5 to 8 kilowatts continuous for most homes. A whole home quote built off square footage alone might size you for 18 or 20 kilowatts instead, because it's covering your dryer, your oven, and your central air all firing at once, whether or not that's ever actually happened at your house during a storm. That gap between your real number and the installer's number is where a lot of the extra cost hides. If nobody has sat down and added up your actual continuous kilowatts and your worst-case surge, then whatever number is on that quote is a guess dressed up as an engineering calculation. That's not a knock on you for not knowing this. Nobody teaches homeowners to think in kilowatts. It's a knock on any installer who skips the load calculation and jumps straight to a square footage number. I've stood in enough basements to know how this plays out. 2 houses, same neighborhood, same square footage, and completely different real loads because one has a well pump and an electric water heater and the other doesn't. A cookie-cutter, whole home quote treats both houses the same. A real load calculation treats them like the 2 different jobs they actually are, and that difference alone can move the price by $10,000 or more. Check number 2. Is the tax credit line on your quote even real? Section 25D, the Federal Residential Clean Energy Credit, expired December 31st, 2025. That's not a rumor. That's the law as written. If your system gets completed in 2026, you do not get that 30% knocked off, full stop, no matter what a salesman tells you. I'll rephrase that in plain numbers so it's not abstract. A Tesla Powerwall 3 installed runs somewhere around $13,000 to $16,500 before any credit. With the old 30% credit, that was closer to $10,300 out of pocket. That's a swing of $4,500 gone for anyone buying in 2026. If a quote in front of you still shows that federal credits subtracted from the price, that installer is either working off an old template or hoping you won't check. And somehow, it gets worse, because the credit expiring wasn't the only thing that moved the price this year. Check number 3. What the tariff hike did to the price you're being quoted. On January 1st, 2026, the tariff on Chinese-made lithium-ion batteries, the Section 301 duty, jumped from 7.5% to 25%. That's not a typo, by the way. It more than tripled in a single day. Layer that on top of the other trade duties already stacked on Chinese battery cells, and total duties on Chinese energy storage batteries landed somewhere around 58% this year, up from around 41% before. That matters because a lot of the value-priced battery stacks, your EG4 and Sol-Ark combinations, some Anker and Bluetti configurations, lean on Chinese-made lithium iron phosphate cells to hit their low price. That price gap did not disappear, but it narrowed, and it narrowed specifically in 2026. Meanwhile, the brands built on domestic or Korean cell supply, think LG's plant in Holland, Michigan, were not hit nearly as hard. Somewhere out there right now, an installer is still working off a 2023 price sheet for one of those Chinese cell stacks and hoping you do not ask when it was pulled. If a quote is comparing a value-priced stack to a Tesla Powerwall 3 on price alone, ask when that pricing was pulled, because the gap between them is not what it used to be. If that sounds like a lot of moving pieces just for pricing, keep watching, because by the time we get to check number 5, you will understand exactly why the kilowatt number matters more than any dollar figure on that quote. Check number 4. Is the state incentive on your quote actually still open? This is the one homeowners get burned on the most, because a program that was paying real money last year can be closed this year, and the number on your quote may be built on a rebate that no longer exists. In California, the SGIP General Market Budget, the main storage rebate that funded a huge share of battery installs, closed to new applicants on December 31st, 2025. A year after that money ran out, some installers in that market are still quoting SGIP numbers on their proposals anyway. What's left is a narrower income-qualified track that's already reserved and waitlisted for most people. If your installer in California is still promising an SGIP rebate, ask them to show you exactly where that budget is coming from, because the general pool is done. On the other hand, if you are in Massachusetts, Connecticut, or Rhode Island, the Connected Solutions program is still paying somewhere around $225 to $275 per kilowatt each summer, plus a smaller winter payment, which can add up to over $1,000 a year just for letting the utility tap your battery during peak demand. Connecticut also runs its own energy storage solutions incentive on top of that, worth checking separately. New York's NYSERDA storage incentive is active too, paying out on a per kilowatt-hour basis that steps down as each region's funding block fills up. So the honest answer here isn't that incentives are dead everywhere. It's that you need the actual current status for your specific utility, not last year's brochure, and not a program that closed while the quote was sitting in your inbox. Check number 5, and this is the one that matters most. So let's slow down and get specific, brand by brand, model by model, because this is where whole home either holds up or falls apart. Whole home does not mean the battery has a lot of kilowatt hours stored up. It means the inverter inside it can push enough continuous kilowatts at the same time to run what your house actually runs together. A big fuel tank on a truck with a weak engine still can't pull a trailer up a hill. Same idea here. Tesla's Powerwall 3 is rated at 11.5 kilowatts continuous on grid, which is the strongest single-unit output among the mainstream sealed systems. FranklinWH's aPower 2 sits at 10 kilowatts continuous. Generac's PWRcell 2 can be configured up to 11.5 kilowatts, depending on how many battery modules you stack. An EG4 and Sol-Ark 15 kilowatt stack, the value-priced option a lot of do-it-yourself-minded buyers go for, can hit similar continuous output too, but only once you've paired the right size inverter with it, which is a separate line item most quotes bury inside the total. Those systems can genuinely start a central air conditioner or a well pump on their own, assuming the rest of your load isn't already eating into that headroom. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable for a couple of popular options. Anker's SOLIX X1 puts out 6 to 6.6 kilowatts, continuous. That's real power, plenty for a lot of critical loads, but it is not central air conditioner and well pump at the same time in most homes. Bluetti's EP900 is rated at 9 kilowatts on the inverter, but if you only bought 2 B500 battery packs to go with it, the practical output caps out closer to 7.6 kilowatts because the batteries themselves become the bottleneck, not the inverter. And Enphase's IQ5P is the one that trips people up the most, because Enphase is a respected name and their gear is genuinely well built. But each 5P unit only puts out 3.84 kilowatts continuous. To start something like a central air conditioner, you typically need 3 or 4 of those units working together. That's not a flaw in the product, it's modular by design. But if someone sells you 1 or 2 Enphase batteries and calls it whole home coverage, do the math yourself before you believe it. So here's your homework before you sign anything. Take the continuous kilowatt number from check number 1, the one nobody calculated for you, and hold it up against the actual inverter rating on the model you're being quoted, not the marketing word on the brochure. If your real load is 9 kilowatts and you're being sold a system rated for 6, that's not whole home, no matter what it says on the sales sheet. That mismatch between the marketing word and the actual inverter rating is the warning sign most buyers walk right past, because they never think to ask for the number in the first place. While we're talking about the panel and the inverter, I want to say this plainly, because it's the one part of this video where I'm not going to walk you through the how. Any system that ties into your main panel needs a proper transfer switch or an interlock kit, full stop. Never let anyone backfeed power into your panel without one, because that can send power back down the line and put a lineman working to restore your street in real danger, on top of the fire risk to your own home. This is not do-it-yourself work. It needs a licensed electrician, pulling a permit, following your local code. That one step is what actually protects your family and your warranty, and it's worth the extra line item on the quote. If you found value in walking through the real math on this, that's exactly the kind of thing I break down every week. So, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe. While you've been checking specs and incentive programs, there's a bigger question sitting underneath all of it, and the next 3 checks are really about what happens after you sign, not before. Everything that makes a whole home battery look bulletproof on a spec sheet can still work against you once the warranty claims actually start coming in. Which brings us to check number 6. Check number 6. The brand's real reliability history, not the brochure version. In November 2025, Tesla issued a recall on the Powerwall 2, roughly 10,500 units, covering a defect where the lithium-ion cells could stop functioning during normal use, and in some cases overheat, smoke, or in rare cases, catch fire. Tesla reported 22 incidents of overheating tied to this, including some property damage and no injuries. To be clear, that recall covers the older Powerwall 2, sold between 2020 and late 2022. The current Powerwall 3 is a different design and is not part of that recall. But if you are buying used, or if an installer is quoting you leftover Powerwall 2 inventory, ask directly whether that specific unit is covered. Generac's PWRcell has its own history worth knowing. For years, a component called the Snap RS, the rapid shutdown device required by code, had a pattern of overheating failures. Generac pushed software fixes that ended up curtailing how much solar output some homeowners could actually use, and a large multi-state installer sued Generac over the fallout in federal court back in 2022. You would think a defect that serious would have made the evening news in the markets it hit. Mostly, it didn't. Generac's newer PWRcell 2 moved away from that troubled design, which is a point in its favor, but it's worth knowing the history of a brand before you're the one calling them at 2 in the morning because something tripped. And it's not always the equipment that fails. A common complaint across every brand on this list is the installer disappearing after the sale, promising ongoing support, and then never picking up the phone again, leaving the homeowner stuck between a manufacturer's warranty and a company that no longer answers. None of this means don't buy these products. It means ask the installer directly which generation you're getting, what the actual failure history looks like, and what happens to your warranty if that installer isn't around in 3 years, instead of taking a trusted brand as the whole answer. That was only round 1 on the reliability question, because the next check is about what happens to the price itself between the quote and the invoice. Which battery you pick is only half the decision. How you pay for it can end up costing you more than the equipment itself. Check number 7. Cash price versus financed price. According to Lawrence Berkeley National Lab's most recent residential solar and storage data, systems paid for with a loan run about 34% more than the exact same system paid for in cash. That's not a small rounding difference. That's the loan fees getting rolled straight into the price you're quoted. On a $15,000 battery, 34% works out to roughly $5,000 you'd never see broken out as its own line item. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau found something even more specific, what the industry calls a hidden dealer fee, typically 10 to 30% of the cash price, and in some cases, over 50%. Their example was a project that would cost $30,000 in cash, but the loan version showed a principal of $39,000 once a $9,000 dealer fee got folded in, all without a separate line item telling you that fee exists. And just when you think you've finally got a straight cash number locked down, that's usually when a new financing fee shows up buried somewhere else in the paperwork. So before you sign, ask for the cash price in writing, as its own number, separate from any financing offer. If a company will not give you a straight cash number, or if the whole pitch is built around $0 down, that is worth a hard second look, because there is no such thing as free equipment. There is only equipment where the cost got hidden somewhere else in the paperwork. I get why financing is tempting. Not everybody has $15,000 sitting around, and I understand that. But there is a real difference between financing a fair price and financing a price that got inflated specifically because you were financing it. Get the cash number first, then decide whether the loan on top of it still makes sense. Up to this point, every check has been about making sure the whole home system in front of you is priced and rated the way it claims to be. Check number 8 flips that assumption entirely. And it's the one I'd want you to hear even if you skip everything else in this video. Check number 8. Do you actually need whole home coverage at all? Go back to that quote from the start of this video. $30,000 to $45,000 for whole home backup. For a lot of houses, That number exists because the installer sized the system to cover every circuit in your home, dryer, oven, central air, all of it running at once if it had to. That's an impressive spec sheet. It's also usually not what actually matters during a real outage. A lot of homeowners sign that whole home quote and breathe easy the next time a storm rolls through. Most of them probably shouldn't have signed quite that big a number, at least not without checking this first. A critical load subpanel changes the math completely. Instead of backing up the whole panel, an electrician moves just the circuits that matter: your fridge, your furnace or boiler blower, your well or sump pump, your lights, your internet, onto a separate small panel that the battery powers directly. That typically cuts the continuous kilowatt requirement by 50 to 70% compared to whole home coverage. A load that would have needed a 15 to 30 kilowatt whole home system might only need 6 to 8 kilowatts on a critical loads panel, which means a single Powerwall 3 or a Power 2, sized correctly, actually covers it, for a fraction of that opening quote. I'll say the uncomfortable part plainly. If most of what you're actually worried about during an outage is the freezer, the furnace, the well pump, and keeping the lights and internet on, you probably don't need whole home backup. You need a properly sized critical loads panel and one correctly rated battery. And that's usually a smaller invoice with the same peace of mind on the nights that matter. So here's the honest verdict. A battery is worth buying if you've got real outage risk, a high time of use rate that punishes you for pulling from the grid at the wrong hour, or a program like Connected Solutions or NYSERDA that's actually paying you back for having one. In those cases, buy it and buy the right size. A battery is a much harder sell if you're on a flat rate, rarely lose power, and there's no incentive on the table, because then you're paying 15 years or more to break even on something with a 10-year warranty. Either way, the real question isn't whether a whole home battery is worth it in general. It's whether the specific size you're being sold matches the specific load your house actually has, or whether you just got quoted for a house twice as demanding as yours. Run the numbers before you sign, not after. If this saved you from an oversized quote, or if you've already been through one of these installs, good or bad, tell me about it in the comments, because that's exactly the kind of real-world data that keeps this channel honest. And if you want the deep dive on whether solar itself still pencils out under these same 2026 numbers, that one's next.